Hey everyone, and welcome. Buckle up because today we're diving deep into the future of gaming. You guys know we love getting your input, and you sent us some really cool stuff this week. Specifically, a super insightful YouTube episode from game makers called Pixels and Profits. These folks really know their stuff with experience across PC, mobile, console gaming, the whole gamut. They just dropped their 2024 recap and their predictions for 2025. And let me tell you, it's a wild ride. So we're going to break it all down for you today. What you need to know about where gaming is headed, from market shakeups, new trends, the impact of AI, subscription services, you name it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to unpack for sure. It's like we're at this turning point in gaming. So many things happening all at once.
Totally. So first things first, the big question on everyone's minds. Are we really in a gaming recession? Or is that just, media hype?
Well, the experts on Pixels and Profits, they actually agree that, yeah, the industry has been in a recession for about 2.5 years now.
Okay, so that's not just like a media buzzword then.
No, they're seeing it too. But here's the thing. They're kind of split on how bad it is and how long it's going to stick around. One of the experts compared it to a V-shaped recession, meaning like a quick dip and then boom, right back up.
Okay, so a quick recovery.
Exactly. But then another expert was like, nah, we're dragging along the bottom, which is, not quite as optimistic.
Yeah, not quite as rosy a picture, so two different perspectives. But looking at the same situation, what kind of evidence are they using to back up those predictions?
Well, for one, there's all the hard data we've been seeing, right? Like mass layoffs across the industry, studios shutting down, even some big game releases, not doing as well as expected. So there's some pretty concrete evidence that things are, well, not exactly booming right now.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, you read about these layoffs, and it's hard not to feel a little bit worried about what's going on.
Yeah, I get it. It's definitely a little unnerving. But they did bring up one positive thing to keep in mind, like a silver lining in all this, is that the overall value of the gaming industry has actually gone way up over the past decade.
Okay, so even if we're in a slump, the long-term potential is still there.
Absolutely. It's a resilient industry.
Okay, well, that is good to hear. But here's what I don't get. If the industry's value is up, then why are so few people playing new games? The experts mentioned that only 15% of Steam players spent any real time on games that came out in 2024. That's like crazy low. What's going on there?
Yeah, that statistic really jumped out at me too. Like, how is that even possible? But when you think about how dominant these live service games are, the big ones like Fortnite, GTA Online, it starts to kind of make sense.
You're saying those games are so massive, they're just like crowding out everything else?
It's more than that, though. It's like these games aren't just games anymore. They've turned into these whole ecosystems. The experts actually called them quasi-social platforms, which I think is a really good way to put it because they have these constant updates, events, these huge communities. It's like a whole world you can get lost in.
Right. And it's tough for a new game to compete with that kind of experience.
Yeah, it's like trying to launch a new social media platform today when everyone's already on the established ones.
Exactly. Good luck getting anyone to switch over.
Totally. And speaking of competition, we got to talk about the rise of Chinese developers. 2024 was a huge year for them, with games like Black Myth Wukong and Genshin Impact making waves all over the world.
It's true. They kind of came out of nowhere and just blew everyone away. Yeah. Do the experts think that trend's going to continue?
Oh, absolutely. They said it's not a fluke. This is the result of a deliberate strategy by Chinese companies to invest in game development and to target Western markets specifically.
So this is like a power shift in the industry then. What does that mean for Western developers? Are they just going to get pushed aside?
Well, they're definitely going to face even more competition, that's for sure. They're going to have to find ways to innovate and stand out even more than before. And the experts even suggested this could change what types of games we see being made in the future.
That's interesting. Okay, so we've got a gaming recession, the rise of Chinese developers. It's a lot to think about. And speaking of shakeups, what about that Microsoft Activision deal? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, you mean the mega deal that finally went through?
The one and only. What do the experts think? Is it going to be good for the industry or bad?
Well, they see it as a potential shakeup of the status quo, that's for sure. Their big takeaway is that Microsoft's focus on Game Pass could make it really hard for other companies to release premium-priced games, the $60 kind of voice.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So are we talking like the decline of AAA games as we know them?
It's definitely a possibility. The experts talked about a potential power vacuum left by Activision, and they asked this question. Will other companies try to step up and fill that void, like maybe EA with Battlefield? Or will we see the decline of a gaming giant?
Good question. Okay, so we've got a gaming recession, the rise of Chinese developers, and now a potential power vacuum. The gaming landscape is definitely shifting.
Mm.
But how? What specific changes to the way games are made do the pixels and profits experts predict?
Well, one of their most interesting predictions was that the traditional way of making games, with these huge studios and massive teams spending years on a single project, that might be on its way out. They actually called it the monolithic model, which honestly sounds a bit outdated.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Like trying to turn a giant ship. It's slow and clunky.
Exactly. And the experts argue that this model is just becoming unsustainable, especially for studios in the West.
Okay, so what's the alternative? Are we all going indie?
Not necessarily. They're pointing to something they call large vector to small vector development.
Okay, I would need you to break that down for me. What does that even mean?
So instead of taking on these huge multi-year projects, they see a future where studios break development down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So instead of building the whole house at once, you build it room by room.
Exactly. It's all about agility, being able to adapt quickly and make changes along the way.
Ah, that makes sense. More efficient, less risk.
Exactly. And they gave an example of a studio already doing this. Grinding Gear Games, the folks behind Path of Exile, they're using a paid alpha release for Path of Exile 2, basically letting their most dedicated players into the development process early on.
So players get to play the game early and give feedback that actually shapes the final product.
It's pretty cool. It is. It's a much more collaborative way of doing things.
I like it. All right, before we move on, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, AI. Remember when everyone was going crazy about AI in gaming
Yeah.
a while back? But then it felt like the hype kind of died down.
Ah, yes, the classic hype cycle. It happens with every new technology. But the pixels and profits folks, they actually made a really compelling argument that AI's impact on gaming. It's just getting started.
Okay, I'm listening. How are they seeing AI changing the game, literally?
Well, they broke it down into 3 levels of integration. First, there's using AI for specific tasks like generating assets or making enemy AI smarter.
Okay, so like making the game development process itself more efficient.
Right, exactly. Then there's integrating AI into the whole development pipeline, which could streamline things even further and maybe even lead to whole new types of games.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But what about the really mind-blowing stuff, like the AI is going to make games for us scenario?
Well, they acknowledge that fully AI-created games are still a ways off, but they think that AI-native games are coming sooner than we think. These are games that are basically designed around AI from the ground up, where the game world and how you experience it are all shaped by complex algorithms.
Whoa, wait a minute. So we're talking about games that can, like, think for themselves and react to players in ways we can't even predict.
Exactly. It's both super exciting and kind of terrifying, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like opening up Pandora's box, but for games.
It is. And they gave this really cool example. Imagine an AI that acts as the dungeon master in a D&D game, creating unique storylines and challenges on the fly based on what the players do.
Oh my God, that would be incredible. It'd be like playing a game that's constantly evolving.
Right. It's mind-blowing.
Okay, one last thing before we take a break. The experts mentioned data being the new alpha in gaming. What did they mean by that?
They're talking about how important data analysis is becoming in every part of game development. It's about using data to understand how players behave, to optimize how you make money from the game, even making those tough decisions about which games to greenlight in the first place.
So it's not just about having a good idea for a game anymore. It's about understanding the numbers behind it.
Exactly. And they shared this wild story to illustrate the point. They talked about Applovin, this mobile gaming company, allegedly shutting down an entire studio, not because their games were failing, but because they wanted to protect their valuable game data.
Whoa, that's intense.
Right. It shows you how valuable data has become in this industry. It's like the new gold rush.
And the studios that can mine that data effectively,
Yeah,
they're the ones who are going to strike it rich.
exactly. They're the ones who will be able to spot the trends, figure out what players want, and ultimately create the games that people love to play.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground already. Gaming recessions, the rise of Chinese developers, the power of AI, data as the new gold. And we're just getting started. We'll be back in a flash to dive into even more predictions and insights from pixels and profits, including what they think about the subscription service craze and the future of game developers themselves. So stay tuned.
Welcome back. Right before the break, we were talking about data as the new gold rush. But before we got too deep into that, we were unpacking the shift away from these massive studios towards what the experts call, large vector to small vector development.
Yeah, it's like a whole new way of thinking about how games are made. It's less
Yeah.
about giant factories and more like a network of smaller workshops. Yeah.
Exactly. And the shift isn't just about the development process itself, it's also about who's making the decisions. The experts on pixels and profits, they think. That this new model actually gives more power to those smaller teams to make creative decisions without having to go through layers and layers of bureaucracy.
So less red tape, more creative freedom. That's got to be a win for the devs.
Right, it's all about empowering those creative minds.
Yeah, I like it. But how does this model actually play out in the real world? Like, are we going to see a bunch of tiny studios popping up everywhere?
Well, we already talked about grinding gear games and how they're approaching Path of Exile 2, but the experts also predict a rise in mergers and acquisitions in 2025. As studios try to adapt to this new landscape they're going to be looking to consolidate their strengths, grab valuable IP, fill gaps in their development pipelines, things like that.
So instead of building up those massive internal teams, they're just going to buy up smaller studios that already have what they need.
Exactly. It's a much more strategic approach.
Makes sense. And you know what this reminds me of? Remember that company we talked about earlier, Embracer Group?
Oh, yeah, the ones who've been on that crazy acquisition spree.
Exactly. They've been ahead of the curve this whole time. It's like they're building this portfolio of specialized studios instead of trying to be a jack of all trades, you know.
Yeah, they're definitely a company to watch in this new environment, that's for sure.
For sure. So are the experts seeing any other signs of the industry adapting to this shift?
Oh, yeah. They think we might see more studios going public in 2025, especially with investor confidence starting to come back to the market.
Interesting. So like Supercell, the mobile gaming giant,
Yep.
or even Epic Games, the folks behind Fortnite,
Mm.
they might finally make that IPO jump.
It's definitely possible, and it would be a huge signal that people believe in the future of the industry.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, but here's a prediction that really caught my attention. The Pixels and Profits crew, they actually see Netflix as a potential dark horse in the gaming race.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I know, right? I mean, they've been dabbling in mobile games, but to become a major player, that seems like a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a long way to go to catch up to the big guys.
But the experts made a really interesting point about how Netflix's push into live sports.
Could actually be a sign of a bigger gaming strategy.
I mean, how does live sports connect to gaming? I'm not following.
So think about it. Netflix has this massive global audience, and they're spending tons of money on sports rights, right?
Yeah.
Well, they could use all that to create tie-in games that tap into the excitement of live events.
Ah, I see. So like they could release a Formula One management sim based on their Drive to Survive docuseries.
Exactly. Or a choose-your-own-adventure style game connected to their WWE broadcast.
They could build these whole gaming ecosystems around their sports content.
Exactly. They know how to build hype, how to get people invested.
And they've got the money to make it happen.
Right. They're not afraid to spend big.
Okay, you've convinced me Netflix is one to keep an eye on, that's for sure.
Definitely. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something we touched on earlier. AI.
Yeah, we got to dive deeper into that.
Yeah.
It's such a game changer, literally.
It is. So remember those 3 levels of AI integration the experts were talking about?
Leveraging, integrating, and AI-native games, right?
Yep, those are the ones.
Well, I think AI is about to become way more integrated into game development.
So it's going to be more than just automating tasks. Like AI will actually be shaping the games we play.
Yes. Imagine game worlds that are constantly evolving and adapting based on AI algorithms. It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? It is. We could have games that feel truly alive,
Yeah.
like reacting to our choices in ways we can't even imagine right now.
Exactly. It makes you think about what it means to be a game developer, what it means to be creative, what it even means to play a game, you know?
Totally. The experts brought up that example of an AI dungeon master, which is awesome.
But they also talked about AI creating personalized storylines and challenges tailored to how you play, like your individual style.
Whoa, that's next level. It's like having a game designed just for you.
It is. But, is all this really realistic? How far off are we from seeing these AI-driven games?
That's the big question, right?
They admit that fully AI-created games are still a ways off. But they think AI-native games, where AI is like baked into the core of the game, those are coming sooner than we think. And that could lead to whole new genres of games. Games that blur the lines between player and creator.
Okay, that's officially blown my mind. But before we go too far down the AI rabbit hole, let's bring it back to something we talked about earlier. The importance of data. You said the experts call it the new alpha in gaming. Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. So they're not just talking about collecting data, they're talking about using it to make smart decisions at every stage of making a game.
So like from understanding player behavior to tweaking gameplay
Yep.
to figuring out the best ways to make money from the game,
Ah.
even deciding which game ideas are worth pursuing in the first place.
It's all about using data to make the best possible choices.
So it's not just about having a gut feeling anymore. It's about backing it up with hard numbers.
Exactly. And, that story we shared about Applevin shutting down a studio to protect their game data.
Yeah, it was wild.
Well, it's a pretty extreme example, but it shows just how much data is worth these days.
It's like a new kind of currency, right?
Totally. And the studios that can mine and analyze that data effectively.
They're the ones who are going to have the edge.
Exactly. They're the ones who are going to be able to predict the trends, anticipate what players want, and ultimately create the games that people can't put down.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, we got to talk about the elephant in the room before we wrap up. Subscription services. They're everywhere these days.
Oh, yeah. Can't escape them.
Game Pass is leading the charge. But are these services actually good for the industry?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, the experts on Pixels and Profits were a bit divided on this one.
Oh, really? So what were the different viewpoints?
Well, some of them see subscription services as a potential threat. They worry that it could hurt innovation and game quality.
How so?
Their concern is that developers might start focusing on making games that are designed to keep players hooked for as long as possible, instead of creating games that are truly unique and fulfilling experiences.
Well, it's like the classic quantity versus quality debate, right?
Exactly. But here's the other side of the coin. Some of the experts believe that subscription services could actually give developers more creative freedom.
More freedom. How so?
Because if they have a steady stream of income from subscriptions, they might be more willing to take risks on innovative games, games that are a little different, games that might not have been financially viable before.
Interesting. So it's like a double-edged sword, right?
Exactly. It could lead to a race to the bottom for engagement metrics, or it could empower developers to create groundbreaking new experiences.
So it all depends on how these services evolve and how developers adapt.
That's the key. But you know what? Before we get too lost in the subscription service debate, I think it's time we shift our focus to the people who actually make all this happen. The game developers themselves, what does the future hold for them? We'll explore that and more in the final part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the future of gaming. We've talked about so much already. Market shifts, new power players, the potential of AI, how the business side is changing. But now I think it's time we talk about the people who actually make all this happen, the game developers themselves. What does the future hold for them in this crazy, ever-evolving world?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And honestly, the experts on Pixels and Profits, they didn't sugarcoat things. They acknowledged that there are some tough realities facing developers right now, especially heading into 2025.
Yeah, we talked about those mass layoffs earlier, which is definitely a tough subject, but it's something we need to address. Do the experts have any insights into how that trend might play out?
Well, they predicted that layoffs will likely continue, at least for the first part of the year. They even used the phrase survive until 2026, which is, kind of sobering.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly paint the most optimistic picture. But they also said that this isn't necessarily a sign of a failing industry, right?
Right. They see it more as a correction, like a recalibration, a shift towards more sustainable and efficient ways of making games.
So less about studios clinging to those old ways of doing things, and more about adapting to the new realities of the market, right?
Exactly. It's about evolving with the times. And they made this really interesting point about how this focus on efficiency could actually be a good thing for developers in the long run. They gave this example of a customer support company that streamlined its workforce using automation and AI.
Okay. And at first I was thinking, oh no, classic case of technology taking jobs.
Right. That's usually the narrative.
Right.
But here's the twist. The company ended up paying its remaining employees significantly more.
Really? More? I would not have expected that.
Right. It's not the usual story. So they explained that by becoming more efficient, they could actually share those gains with their employees.
Yeah.
And create a more sustainable, more rewarding work environment.
So it wasn't just about cutting costs. It was about investing in the people who were essential to their success.
Exactly. And the Pixels and Profits team also highlighted another important point. The skills that game developers have, they're incredibly valuable, even outside of the gaming world.
Right. We're talking about things like UI, UX, design, storytelling, user engagement, monetization strategies, all super relevant stuff.
Absolutely. All those skills are in high demand across a ton of industries.
It's like a transferable skill set that can open doors to all sorts of opportunities.
Totally. Tech, finance, education, healthcare, you name it. Anywhere that user engagement and digital experiences are important.
It's like the gaming industry is a training ground for the future of digital innovation.
I love that. That's a great way to put it. And, even though the industry is going through some changes, the experts truly believe that the future for game developers is still incredibly bright.
It's great to hear. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all this?
I think the key takeaway is this. The gaming industry is not dying, it's evolving. It's a dynamic, ever-changing world full of challenges and opportunities. And the developers who can adapt, embrace new technologies, and stay ahead of the curve, they're the ones who are going to shape the future of gaming.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for everyone listening, we highly encourage you to check out the Pixels and Profits episode from Game Makers. It's a fantastic deep dive into the industry, and it'll give you even more to think about as we head into this exciting new year in gaming. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.